Eagles Entertainment.
With the 15th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by Life Brand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and Eagles Day here at the National Scouting Combine. We're going to start things off with Mr. Relevant, where I welcome in Senior Defensive Assistant Jeremiah Washburn, who also has held the title of Director of Player Personnel here in Philadelphia. So a really intriguing person here with this Eagles staff, has really had feet in both the scouting side and in the coaching side. We're going to talk about what he takes away from the National Scouting Combine, and namely the drills, which get started on Thursday afternoon here in Indianapolis. So we'll have all of that, those recaps coming your way in the coming days. So I'm going to catch up with Jeremiah Washburn here at the top of the show. After that, I'm going to start Draft Buzz with Chris McPherson, where we're going to go through General Manager Howie Roseman and Head Coach Nick Sirianni. They both had their press conferences here on Wednesday afternoon. 4 big takeaways from CMAC there from those 2 press conferences. Also, I chatted with a bunch of quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends at the media session today, so I'll get some of those big takeaways as well. Then we'll wrap it up with our draft mailbag. A couple of questions from you at home after I solicited it on Twitter. So let's real quickly, before we get into this interview with Jeremiah Washburn, a quick reminder, make sure you head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a review. If you've got a question, we will answer it here in an upcoming show. Leave us a mock draft. We'll break it down, your player rankings, whatever you've got. Make sure you go on over to our Apple Podcast page, and we will get to it here on an upcoming episode. That said, let's get to our interview here. It's time now for Jeremiah Washburn and Mr. Relevant.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, excited to welcome in for the very first time here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, Jeremiah Washburn. Coach, thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So getting ready for the Combine, and just from a big picture standpoint, why is the Combine important? What is so important about the trip out to Indianapolis?
Well, it's just, big picture wise, it's just the next step in a process of a player that for our scouting staff starts, back in the previous spring and goes through the fall and through the All-Star season. So it's just the next step in the process of the player, the evaluation.
And there's obviously so much on the outside, especially for fans at home. We see what's on TV, but there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. So it's really a whole big picture of everything that happens out in Indy.
It is, and there's things that we don't see, with especially the medical part, which is really the reason that the Combine started so many years ago, was you were combining information, of the teams with the medical staff, and there's things that we didn't see with that. But honestly, because of TV, the fans are seeing about what we see. We're just sitting there live.
You have one of the more unique backgrounds and roles when you look around the league, and having a foot both in coaching side and personnel side. How differently do you feel like you are able to view these prospects because you've had a foot in both arenas?
I think the scouting side's helped. It gives me a process. You do learn how to evaluate a player through a consistent process. And the biggest thing is a database of players. You can compare guys to players you might have evaluated 15 years ago that might have had the same traits and see if that guy, had a success or didn't in the league. And so I think that's the biggest part of that, scouting-wise. Coaching-wise, it's just where the player fits. You can at least get a vision of the player and how he fits for you or maybe another team.
And people talk about player comps all the time, especially around this event because of the athletic testing and the measurements, but you can have a comparison when it comes to like a role that a guy plays in an offense or a defense, a guy's personality. When you meet him, you're like, man, he really reminds me of this guy and how he carries himself. Those comparisons can go a lot of different ways, right?
Absolutely. There's a story from a couple years ago, where I had a prospect at Eastern Michigan, Max Crosby. We worked him out, had lunch with him, and I tell this story all the time around here, where the guy talked about nothing but pass rush for the whole hour, and his girlfriend was with us and said that's all he talks about. And you could feel his passion and things you might not have seen on tape. You could see show up as a player with the Raiders, and you kind of look for those things going forward, with that. And so, I don't know if that answered.
Sure. So when it comes, obviously, for a lot of fans,
the pre-draft stuff starts like right now, maybe Senior Bowl a couple weeks ago, but happened months and months and months ago, as you mentioned. It's a culmination of a year-long process. How much of the evaluation process is done before everybody sets foot in Indianapolis?
Well, it depends on who you are. If you're a scout, this is the tail end of it. This is kind of the culmination of what you've been working on. For the coaches, this is the start. So this is the first time we'll see these guys in person, and it's kind of the start of our scouting season. And so it's different ends of the process for each side.
How exciting is that, getting eyes on these guys for the first time, but especially having been on both ends of it and seeing seeing both ends of that process? How exciting is it to start this new class?
Oh, very exciting. I mean, I have no hobby, so this is it. I mean, I'd be doing this anyway, and I'm sure there are folks that do that anyway. My son does, and all of his friends. So I love it.
So I want to ask you about the specific drills, the athletic testing portion of the workout that we're going to see out in Indianapolis. And we'll start with the big one that everybody loves, and that's the 40-yard dash. And obviously, it's become such a huge event. What can teams get from the 40-yard dash? And I guess it's going to change position by position.
Well, okay. I mean, and I'm a line coach, so I'm going to answer this from a line coach perspective because these skill guys. I mean, it's a big deal, obviously,
sure,
and they should talk about it, but. For line coaches, there is a little bit to it, and you're going to see all the line coaches are sitting near the 10, which is important for us. So you do see a little bit of burst, how they can get out of their stance, and that does predict a little bit to football.
Yeah, so you want to be able to see that explosiveness out, and I guess you kind of see that with the jumps as well, right? So when you're talking broad, vertical, are you looking for some of the similar kinds of traits?
Yeah, I love the jumps. Absolutely. I actually did that. That was my first job at the combine. Yeah, I did all these. I mean, I did a ton. I actually had a group one time, but I did do the vertical jumps for a couple times. It was actually the first time I was on TV. My kids could see me because I was the tall guy, but I do love the jumps. Yeah, absolutely. Broad and vert, because you can see how they can come through their hips. It's great for defensive ends, especially. So I'll be watching that for sure.
What are the differences between the two in terms of what can be gleaned from them, or is it about the same?
I mean, I'd love to have some great answer. You can ask Ted Rath for that, but for me, one goes up, one goes out. So that's the biggest difference for me.
Sure. When you get to the shuttles, you get the short shuttle, even the long shuttle, the 3-cone drill. Obviously, what comes from those 3 drills?
Oh, I love those drills too.
Sure.
I do. You get a great sense of lateral movement, and if a guy can bend. So those are great drills. Actually, I was just texting with one of my old players, Josh Sitton, who's a great guard for Green Bay, and he crushed the 3-cone, and I think most of his teammates in Green Bay were really good at that. So that's something as a line coach you definitely take a look at. O-line and D-line was the 3-cone and the short shuttle.
We've seen over the years, and we're talking over the last couple of decades, guys have gotten better and better and better at running these tests because they're training all off-season long to get ready for this event. How hard is it to kind of separate, hey, this guy shows that he can beat this drill versus showing that on the football field?
Yeah, and that's the deal with these drills is you're looking either for verification of what you're seeing on tape or, hey, do I need to go back and look for this because he really tested well at this drill? And you can cheat it. I mean, guys can work really hard at it, but it also shows that guys care and that they're able to work at these things and improve. So there's clues and details and everything with these players.
And then you get to the position-specific aspect of the workout. And what I love is over the last couple of years, we've seen all these new drills kind of worked in. I know this year we'll see some new ones. How do you kind of separate seeing the position workout from the athletic testing? Are you looking for some of the same kind of things?
You are. And, the Combine does a great job with this. And the coaches that work the drills do a really nice job of trying to get a whole picture of the player. And it's still hard to do. Especially from the lineman perspective. You're not going to get the push-pull, the strength, the power stuff as much. But you do get a great look at how they can move, and then even the little things like how coachable is the player, how competitive is the player within those drills. That's a big deal for us. So they do matter.
People talk about traits all the time and tools. How quick does it take to be able to say, like, all right, this guy's got something that he can work with? What is that process like when you first get eyes on a guy?
Yeah, that's a big deal. I mean, that's why we do it. That's what we do. And you're always looking for that trait to see if you can develop it. You're looking for clues within a player, within, whether he wants to be developed, as Jim Schwartz used to say. Does this guy really want to be developed, or, does he just have a trait that's never going to be used? And so you're always looking for that. And It's like that old movie Three Amigos, which I'm dating myself, is, it's like they asked at the end of the movie, what's the one thing you can do, and so you're always looking for that within the player.
Sure. And to me, like, that's one thing that's lost on people, is that all these guys have strengths and all these guys have weaknesses. It's about trying to find what puts these guys in best position. And that's really what you're trying to find, is what is their biggest strength.
Totally.
Yeah. The last question, post-combine, get back from Indianapolis. Do the results from that week, whether it's off field, on field, do they force you to kind of reevaluate what you saw previously, or what is that process getting back from Indianapolis?
That's a great question. Phil Savage used to call this the fog of confusion time. And you really want to use the tape. And I know it's cliche. Everybody says it. And it's the truth. You want to use the tape. You're just looking for this as either confirmation or do I need to dig a little deeper? And it's as much on the interviews as well, where the guy might not come off well, and it's a tough situation for these guys to interview. So we're empathetic to that. So you just have to dig a little deeper at times, and maybe get to know the player better through the visits and calling coaches and so on. So that's what the combine's for.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
Really fun to catch up there with Jeremiah Washburn. Hope you guys learned a little bit there about the drills and what to watch for as things get underway on Thursday here from Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. As I welcome in Chris McPherson. C-Mac, drills just about 24 hours away. Excited to get things going here.
Yeah, you can feel it.
No question.
Anticipation in the air, of course.
Well, so obviously, like I said earlier, Eagles Day here at the Combine. Both Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni having their press conferences with the media corps on Thursday or on Wednesday afternoon. Wanted to say 4 takeaways, maybe two from each presser. Wanted to start things off with you. I'll let you go with number 1.
Some of them are going to blend between both press conferences. The first one, the biggest one by far. The Eagles excited to see Jalen Hurts take the next step as a starting quarterback for this football team. When asked, has anything changed in regards to the quarterback position since last month? I believe it was January 19th when Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman addressed the media to end the 2021 campaign. They said nothing has changed. They expect Jalen Hurts to develop. They expect him to grow. They expect him to learn from what he did this past season and to make huge jumps in year 2 as a starting quarterback for this football team. So the Eagles firmly behind Jalen Hurts as a starter. By far, for me, the biggest takeaway here from their press conferences today in Indianapolis.
And the big thing to remember, too, I believe both referred to his age as 23-year-old starter and a guy that led them to the playoffs as a 23-year-old player. So I think looking at the youth in this quarterback class, also looking at the veteran market, you say, okay, well, Jalen Hurts, gives you some proven a proven play there at the quarterback position, but also still has that youth, still has that upside for getting better. What's number 2 for you?
Well, real quick, I just want to touch on this. Nick Sirianni had 4 things when it comes to evaluating the quarterback.
Yes.
Okay. Number 1, accuracy. Number 2, decision making. He said Hurts will improve with experience. Yep. He said you look at quarterbacks who have grown. You point to Philip Rivers, someone he coached. You looked at Tom Brady in his career. Those guys have so many reps. They've seen it all. They've allowed themselves to be able to see and understand what defenses are doing to be able to know where to go with the ball before the ball's even snapped.
And even if you're a listener at home, you're like, oh, you're going to point to 2 of the best to do it in modern history. You can look at guys like Derek Carr this year had a huge season with more reps and more time and more experience, and you start having that mental Rolodex of defenses and coaches and calls. You start to play your best football, and I think that's another good example.
What's the stat you brought up with Jalen Hurts? He hasn't had the same coach.
Yeah, he hasn't had the same system in
high school.
Yeah, since high school. So this will be a new one for him in terms of the continuity there.
So number 3, the ability to create. No question about that. And it's not just the rushing yards. It's also buying time in the pocket with his legs to be able to give his playmakers more time to get down the field. And the last one, 4th, arm strength.
Yep.
And they were very much in favor of Jalen Hurts saying he has the arm to make all the throws necessary. There's no question, no qualms whatsoever about Jalen Hurts and his arm strength. So just wanted to reiterate that part of the press conference there before we transition to number 2, which is the resources to build. The Eagles have the flexibility with being under the salary cap this year, having money to spend, having 10 draft picks, including 3 in the first round. Howie Roseman specifically noted to me when I asked him about the resources, saying it's not just the 3 first-round picks. We have 10 overall, so keep that in mind. The flexibility to build this football team, and also the knowledge of what it looks like with the players in Nick Sirianni's schemes on offense and defense, a better understanding of which players that they're going to want to look for. So the big thing about being at the Combine this week is learning more about the football IQ and the character and the mental makeup, which are going to be very important. But the big thing is here, the Eagles have the ability to, whether they want to hit in free agency, whether they want to wait till the draft, it's going to be an ongoing process because they can make trades all the way up until the middle of the season. So, but nonetheless, the Eagles have the flexibility and the resources to build the roster in the best way they see fit.
No, and I think when you look at this team, this is a group that is always trying to build and always trying to improve in every way imaginable. We've seen Howie Roseman be aggressive on the trade market, the waiver wire. You're always working to be able to get this team better. They're going to find every avenue to do that. What's number 3?
Number 3, no update on Jason Kelce.
Okay.
Nick Sirianni said that a keg of beer was delivered to his house today. Didn't tell us.
I did like that. Yeah, that was the first answer in the press conference.
Didn't tell us what type of beer. Nonetheless, Jason Kelce is being able to enjoy some cold ones while he ponders his future. So no decision there whether or not he'll come back for 2022. And either way, if he comes back, obviously you're getting an all-pro center, one of the best in the game, one of the best in franchise history. If he doesn't, Nick Sirianni is like, we've got resources internally, and we've got free agency and the draft. I mean, there's time. We don't need to anoint a starter on March 2nd. Happy birthday to my mom, by the way, on this day if Jason Kelce were to make a decision.
All draft analysts in the room at that point that were listening to the press conference waiting with bated breath as they had Tyler Linderbaum in their mock drafts waiting for the answer to that question. Next one for you.
So no rock, paper, scissors this year.
This is great.
It is basketball, shooting hoops with Nick Sirianni. That is the contested challenge that the draft prospects who meet with the Eagles in the private interview rooms have waiting for them this year. It's not the one that you hang on like your door frame. It's like, the one that's probably 5 or 6 feet high, a smaller one that stands on the ground. But nonetheless, it's an icebreaker. It's a chance to show off the players' competitiveness and just loosen them up because they're so trained by the agents and coaches to how to handle these interviews. It kind of just lightens the mood a little bit. But Nick Sirianni said you're just trying to learn a little bit more about the player because this coaching staff, this personnel staff did a great job of finding guys who were able to right the ship after the 2-5 start this season. You need high character guys to be able to do that. The Eagles are trying to find those types of players.
2 things. Number 1, I love this. Number 2, if you listen to yesterday's edition of the Journey to the Draft podcast, you may have gotten a little bit of a tease as to what was coming there. Nick Sirianni saying that if it was up to him, like he wouldn't have done the rock, paper, scissors last year. That was a product of being virtual, that if it were up to him, they'd be shooting hoops. Little did I know, I laughed when he said that. I did not know to take him literally. I wish I did. I would have pushed him harder on it. But Nick Sirianni, very literal in saying, he wanted to be able to get those guys with a basketball in their hand. That's exactly what he's got here as the Big Ten tournament gets ready to kick off here in Indianapolis.
Perfect transition there. So speaking of shooting hoops, I'm sure some of the players reacted to that.
They did.
Your chance to bounce around to listen to some of the different press conferences.
There was a couple of guys that did talk about it. I think Sky Moore, the wide receiver from Western Michigan, was the first to bring it up and said he went 5 for 5. I really enjoyed it. So he had to flex a little bit on that one.
He's going up on the draft board all of a sudden now.
Sam Howell said he went 3 for 5 and made the joke, I might be off their draft board now, when he said that in the presser, which was really funny. Obviously, that is not the purpose of that exercise. But
at least you don't think it is.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Takeaways real quick. Cade Otton, the Washington tight end, one of the top tight ends in the country, couldn't go to the Senior Bowl because of an injury that hampered him on the back end of the year. I did talk to him. He's not going to participate in drills, still recovering from that injury. But one thing I took away, and I think is important to note, he just talked about meetings with teams and said, one of my big things that I'm really grateful for with Washington, coming from a pro-style offense, I'm speaking the same language as a lot of these coaches. When they are bringing something to me and I say, they ask me what I call this, it's the same thing that they call it. And I think that's important when we're talking about this whole process and, whether it's a tight end playing with his hand in the dirt, or an offensive lineman playing from the 3-point stance, a quarterback that works under center. You can go right down the list, corners, linebackers, the whole deal. it's not necessarily about what they were asked to do, because as we say all the time, just because you weren't asked to do it in college doesn't mean that you can't do it in the NFL. But those guys have a little bit of a leg up, not just from a physical standpoint, but also from that communication standpoint, from the mental standpoint. And I thought Kate Otten kind of brought that to light. A really good point there from his presser.
Yeah, I mean, a big thing this week. Again, we're going to see the timing and testing drills begin on Thursday afternoon. But the big thing also behind the scenes is the medical and how these guys do in the interviews, and can they show off that high football IQ? Again, just another piece of the puzzle as they try to figure out how to assess the draft boards.
So the other part, obviously, with these interviews, are trying to get a sense of who these guys are. And look, teams, the thing to remember, this is not their first time diving into a player's personality and character. It might be the first time they get to sit in front of a player, but that's what the purpose of NFL scouts. They're on the ground, boots on the ground in all these college towns all across the country, getting a sense of all these players from a personality standpoint as well as from a physical standpoint. I caught up with a couple Notre Dame players. Obviously, on the media, we don't have those same tools at our disposal, right? So for me, I really kind of value talking with players about their teammates, whether they're guys that are in this class or in future classes. Asking Notre Dame quarterback Jack Cohn and Notre Dame wide receiver Kevin Austin, hey, just who was the leader on that offense? Both guys immediately went to the running back, Kyron Williams, who was a redshirt sophomore this year. He's a redshirt freshman a year ago, started all 13 games last year as a freshman. Kevin Austin called him the heartbeat, said literally we call him the heartbeat because he always brought the juice, always brought the energy. Jack Cohn, who transferred in from Wisconsin for his final season, said he was super impressed with him right away. And so just obviously great for Kyron Williams, a young player, great third down back, undersized, and that'll be the knock on him. We'll see how he tests here this week. But huge that's how his teammates kind of revere him, and those are the kind of nuggets teams will be looking for over the course of this week.
And you also learn names so you can start your 2023.
Oh, I always am doing that. So I got a handful of those this week as well. So, or I should say today, I'll have a lot more here.
Who do I need to watch?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Set my agenda for May, June, July. But no, so that was always good. And then last one. Most confident player that I spoke to in terms of how they're going to test, because guys are usually pretty, they try and pump the brakes a little bit. I don't want to say what I'm going to test. And I don't believe that Maryland tight end Chig Okonkwo said exactly what he was going to run, but he was very, very confident in his athleticism, his speed. He's like, I'm gonna really shock people. So at 6'2", 250 pounds, as kind of a movable chess piece, H-back type of player at the tight end position. Chig Okonkwo, a player to keep an eye on as we get into drills on Thursday.
Let's see if he does it.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. It's one thing if you're going to come here and boast and be confident, that's great. You want to see that. It's always when you ask a player, why are you the best whatever position in the draft class. For him, why is he the best tight end in his draft class? You want to hear them just sell themselves and be confident in their game, and let's see if he takes it to the track. So love it. That's all part of the competition. So stock up from an Eagles standpoint right there.
We'll take a look and see how he does this week. Before we wrap this show up, I want to wrap things up with our draft mailbag. We got a few questions here. Let's get to that segment right now.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the draft mailbag.
All right, so I solicited for questions here on Twitter, 4 to be exact, that we got back. So let's start with Big Dogs 1318. Here's the question, C-Mac. Do you think the Eagles, Jets, and Browns draft similarly and have the same philosophies because of the general managers in place? Do you see any team moving into the top 10 this year for a quarterback, and what would that package look like? So 2 questions there. As far as quarterback movement, we'll get a sense of reports and stuff like that moving forward. Not sure as we sit here today what that looks like. We'll see. I mean, everybody says it only takes one. So it only takes one team to fall in love with one of these quarterbacks. And
is there ever a year? Let me ask you this: is there ever been a year where the quarterbacks don't move up? Every year, there might be a lukewarm feeling about the quarterbacks that, quote unquote, it's not a great class or what have you, but those guys still rise up anyway. I can't think of a year.
The one I could think of was 2013. That was the Geno Smith, EJ Manuel, right?
That's the closest one.
Yeah, and I look, that was almost a decade ago at this point. I don't know if this class is as to that level in terms of, but I've said numerous times I think this class has plenty of talent, so it wouldn't shock me if there was a team or two that fell in love with a couple of these guys, whether it's Willis or Pickett or Corral or Ritter or whoever it is. It wouldn't shock me if that happened. Getting to the first part of that question,
the philosophical one. Yes.
Yeah, to me, every general manager and every team, the way they make decisions, it's very tough to say like, they draft similarly because Joe Douglas was in Philadelphia for 2 years, or same with Andrew Berry. The thing to remember is these guys all have experiences from earlier in their career. Joe Douglas came up in Baltimore with Ozzie Newsome. So I would say that in his formative years as a scout, my guess is that, of course he's going to pull things along the way. He's going to evolve. He's going to have differences. You would say the same thing about Eric DeCosta in Baltimore. Spent his entire scouting career in Baltimore, working under Ozzie Newsome, became his right-hand man, stepped into general manager. Look, a lot of those things are going to the same. They've done some different things since he's become the general manager, right? They've trended a little bit younger, things like that. So I think that when you look at teams around the league, all these decision makers, they're going to have their tendencies, and depending on what scouting tree they come from, there are going to be some core principles that I think are the same, but they're all going to have some differences. And also, the coaching staffs that they work with are going to have a say in there as well.
Of course. And also the teams that they've inherited as well.
No doubt.
Because if you come in with a team that, Nick Sirianni said this during his press conference, I was very fortunate to have strong depth along the offensive and defensive lines as a first-year head coach, and especially along the offensive line, that depth was tested.
Yep.
So it also depends on the situation. Now, obviously, some of these guys are going through build-ups where they're starting from ground zero and working their way up. But overall, I think, across the board, you're going to see these football evaluators look at the premium positions relatively the same, okay? Yep. Which ones are the most important? It's just their process and how they go about picking which ones to put in those spots.
I think the safety position is a good example if you're looking here at the Eagles, right? And I think there will be people who will say like, the Eagles haven't drafted a safety in the top 2 rounds in X amount of years. It's like, well, for a large amount of time over the last half decade plus, you had Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod. You didn't need to spend a second-round pick or a first-round pick on a safety. You felt pretty good about where you were at there. So I think that kind of, to your point, depends on the team you have. That doesn't mean that the Eagles don't value safety. It just means they didn't need to address it early. So I think that obviously is a big part of it as well. You're going to take it year by year. Next question here. Irish Eagles said, I saw that Dane Brugler, actually a couple people responded with this. I saw that Dane Brugler has Trent McDuffie, the Washington corner, as his number 1 corner in his latest position rankings. Do you guys think that there's a real possibility he's the first corner taken? And Dane has certainly become smitten with Trent McDuffie, the Washington corner. He's a little bit on the smaller side compared to Derek Stingley, to Andrew Booth, to Sauce Gardner. He's not as big as those guys, but really quick, really tough, really instinctive. He's versatile. He's experienced. He's a 3-year starter, started right away for Washington. Remember Jimmy Lake, their former head coach? He's a DB guy. He was the defensive backs coach, then the defensive coordinator, then the head coach. So Trent McDuffie is a really, really skilled player. Is he the first off the board? We'll see. But we have to remember, at corner especially, scheme plays a huge, huge part in those selections.
Certainly. I mean, nothing really to add to that outside the fact that, we're getting to see some of these guys for the first time, especially in the timing and testing drills. That's going to be a tiebreaker for some of these guys. And, we'll learn a little bit more, especially as we start to hear how they perform in the interviews and the official height weights and things of that nature. So that's going to be one of the fun positions to watch evolve over the next month plus to see who rises to the top.
Next one from Ben McCardell. Everyone is convinced that the Eagles are taking an edge rusher in round 1. Isn't it possible that all the top rushers are off the board by number 15? Let's say that Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, Jermaine Johnson, George Karlaftis, Trayvon Walker, and David Ojabo are all gone. Is 15, 16, or 19 too high for the next edge rushers? Yeah, and that's why it's funny. Howie Roseman said today, he was talking about the edge rusher. He said, look, we need to get better. Our pass rush needs to get better.
Yes.
It's hard to believe we come out of the offseason without addressing it. And they made the joke like, famous last words, right? Because there are those scenarios where something like that can happen. That said, if all of those guys go, which that's something that's possible. It's on the table. That means that Kyle Hamilton or Derek Stingley or whoever, insert top prospect, they're falling, right? So somebody's got to be there at that point. So maybe it's not the edge rusher at 15, but you're going to get another top player falling into that point.
Maybe it's one of the corners that we just talked about. Who knows? But the thing is, with the 3 first-round picks, Howie Roseman talked about, we're not necessarily going to be taking 3 first-round players.
Right.
We have, again, the flexibility, optionality to move up if we see fit. If there's a guy who's slipping, or if there's a run on these edge rushers and there's a guy we really love, they can go up and get him if they feel they need to do so.
Yep, absolutely. So let's get to our last question here. DKane1012 asked if Notre Dame quarterback Jack Cohn lasts until day 3, do you take a shot on him with one of the later picks in a developmental role, knowing that you still have Gardner Minshew for a year? So, yeah, I think when you're looking at quarterbacks, you're going to try and identify who's the guy that has that ability to be a long-term backup, potential starter way down the line. Jack Cohn is a guy that fits that model, fits that profile. Yeah, I don't see why you wouldn't try and do that if the value is right.
Yeah, I mean, they brought in Reed Sinnett, and he was inactive for most of the season, so I'm sure that they're going to want to get him for the entire offseason to see what he brings to the table. But of course, I mean, you know that you need to have options there at quarterback, especially when even the Eagles had to deal with it this season, and most teams at some point you're going to need to go to the backup. You need to have a competent backup in place, and Cohn has quality starting experience at 2 different programs, 2 different high-power football programs. So.
Cohn had full autonomy at the line of scrimmage this year
Really?
at Notre Dame. In year 1, obviously being on campus could change all the protections, set all the mic points, all that. So said he was really gracious with the offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees, with allowing him to have that kind of control. So, good questions there from the 4 of you that sent those in. Thanks so much to everybody here. Make sure to return tomorrow. We'll be breaking down everything from the first set of workouts, quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, taking the field on Thursday afternoon into the late evening hours. We'll be breaking it all down tomorrow right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand.